How can the idea of universal fraternity help us address the ecological crisis? In some ways, this is a fitting place to end, as Pope Francis expressed it in his encyclical letter Laudato Si. We do not have two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. In other words, the ecological crisis is bound up with, and in a complex causal relationship with, the various social crises we've discussed, from economic and political incentives, to technological development, to the influence of international conflict and institutions, and so on.
We face with not two different types of crises, but two interrelated crises, ecological and also social. Integral ecology means that ecology is not only a conversation about the green environment, but also a conversation about the moral conditions of the human person and the way he lives, his access to healthcare, education, and all of that. And so Benedict had also dealt with something similar, and he had also talked about social ecology. Okay, so the sense of ecology goes a little bit way back. John Paul II talked about human ecology. Benedict talked about social ecology. Francis put them all together and it's integral ecology. Okay, so that's why the thing is not one and the other, but it's all because the nature of the environment impacts the human person, and the human person also impacts the environment. Our way of our lifestyle, our behavior is what causes the deterioration of the environment.
To quickly sketch the contours of the crisis, we can start at the physical level. The list includes climate change, unprecedented loss of biodiversity, rapid depletion of natural resources, and pollution of land, water, and air. This has profound effects, but also causes at the social level. We are witnessing a rupture, not only of the web of life, but also of the social fabric. The ecological crisis, and in particular the climate crisis, are affecting basic areas of human welfare, such as food security, health, shelter, and the ability to make a livelihood, leading to additional social problems from violent conflict to mass migration.
This century is very significant because we have now firmly entered the Anthropocene. The last 10,000 years, in some senses, as far as nature is concerned, have been very benign for human beings. We've created our cultures, our civilization, our faith systems, our institutions in this context, which has been very benign to us. But because of human action, certainly over the last 200, 250 years, and even before that, through the process of colonization, through the process of actually expanding our grasp beyond our reach, we have not only created challenges for people across the world, but we've also created challenges for nature. Part of that comes back and goes back a very long time, and it goes back to the separation, at least in our minds and our institutions and our way of working, between people and nature. This century has the opportunity of correcting that, because now, of course, we have, probably the largest population of people on this planet, almost 10 billion people. And if you look at the entire century, that's almost 1 trillion life years that's present in the current century, which is in effect pretty much equivalent to all of history before this. So there's a tremendous opportunity to do many things around it.
The industrial society where we have completely separated from nature even worse. We have started to defeat nature, to massacre nature, to mutilate it and so on. This type of economy or this type of civilization has no future, of course. Climate change is just the first thing that is coming to get us, because it's the fastest of all. But the destruction of biodiversity, of fertile soils, you name it, acidification of oceans. I think the only thing you can set against this is a powerful narrative. A narrative that is so compelling, beautiful, and at the same time plausible, of a future based on bioeconomy, for example, based on sharing ideas instead of competing with each other. It has to be so beautiful in the end and so touching also, that people want to be part of his future. They want to be part of his stories. So I guess if we have a future for our civilization, it will be by the re-entanglement with nature. The great re-entanglement, that means we start to make peace with nature. That's the first step. But through making peace with nature, we also make peace with each other, because we are part of the same matrix that is providing us with a sustainable and happy life. It is as simple as that.
How can the idea of universal fraternity help us address the ecological crisis? Pope Francis suggests that we should start by seeing ourselves more and more as a single family dwelling in a common home. But how can we do this? Education must be part of it. But is education sufficient? Would we not also need to think about our basic principles of economic and technological development? And more fundamentally, about the good we are all aiming at in our social and individual activity? Can we credibly talk about a global common good that avoids utopian fantasy, but more clearly recognizes both the relational and individual dimensions of the human person?
Universal fraternity, I think, is an idea whose time has come. And while it may not be the only way of trying to open up questions as far as the current global polycrisis is concerned, it can certainly help us open up a range of questions that we need to ask in the current context. Where have we come from? Who we are and where we're going. And this, I think, is a useful way of trying to understand not only our collective past, but also our common future.
The human person also suffers from the abused environment. The environment not respected means human life not respected. And so in that kind of situation, does universal fraternity provide a solution to such a complex, integral ecology crisis or not? One can say it helps. It provides a way out of this, in the sense that when we respect our sense of universal brotherhood, universal interrelatedness, so universal fraternity ultimately and at the core invites us to recognize how interrelated and interconnected we are. And in our interrelatedness, we act in solidarity. And acting in solidarity then, that reaches us also to the environment. So we cannot act in solidarity with towards one another without recognizing that which diminishes and creates a problem for solidarity. And that can be hungry people anywhere, so you want to react by providing food to eat. How do they get hungry? Because there's no rainfall. Ecological issue leads to a social condition which invites us all to come together and act together. So a sense of solidarity, therefore, becomes a consequence of our sense of universal fraternity. Because we related with one another, we feel invited to work for the common good of all of us. And the call for a common good, or the sense of a common good, which binds us all together, which invites us all to work together, becomes a way that we can connect universal fraternity to integral ecological issues.
We struggle with the idea of fraternity because there are many things that are bundled into one. One idea, of course, is fraternity comes from a common birth. Brothers and sisters and children are born together, and that forms fraternal bonds. Those are biological bonds. But we know for a fact that all of us share a common genetic ancestry. There's a much deeper range of biophysical processes that connect all of us, not only because we have historical ancestors within sort of the hominoid tradition, but even before that, but actually in everyday life, There are a whole range of biological processes that connect us. But there are much wider things that actually make things much more common. You don't have to be born into the same family, into the same race, into the same place to be able to both practice and experience the process of coming together. And I think that is what most of the great faith traditions, many of the indigenous peoples in some senses, have lived experience of. So the question, for example, of whether you own the land, which in a sense is a given condition for most modern societies, or whether the land owns you, because you see the continuity between one generation and the other in terms of conserving and managing the landscape. That, I think, is a very critical question. So the question of fraternity in some senses is interpreted in various forms, and people have different views of it. But fundamentally, the thing that sits behind this is the question that we are all connected at multiple levels.
How might the idea of universal fraternity help us strengthen existing efforts to pursue shared goals? I'm thinking of something like the Sustainable Development Goals. Is it realistic to think that a robust idea of universal fraternity, with its anthropological assumptions about the intrinsic relationality of human persons, be able to help us build up our ability to pursue shared goals to address the ecological crisis?
Sometimes some ideas are universal and in some senses can travel. In other cases, they can't. So the question then is, how do we transliterate, how do we transcreate some of these wider and deeper principles, whether it's principles of ecology, principles of living in harmony with each other, principles of trying to build a society that's more equal. So if people are at the center of this process, if change is dependent on people, on the institutions, then it's dependent on us as people who have concern for humanity, have concern for the future, to be able to go and work with where people are. The fact is that over the 21st century, not only is Asia making a significant comeback in economic and political terms, but in actual fact, Africa is going to be the epicenter of the demographic explosion that we're going to be seeing over the next 30 or 50 years. So this shift is a fundamental shift in the way the world is working. It's not only geopolitical, it's also a shift of where the opportunities actually lie and how to enable solutions that work at the local level to permeate and bubble up. And politically this has been tried in 2015. This is what the attempt at creating the SDGs was about. We're trying to build this solidarity across all these countries so that everybody has a chance, irrespective of where they came from, irrespective of what their level of development is, to be able to ensure that everybody, and this is the idea of leaving no one behind, everybody has an opportunity in their lifetimes to actually realize what we all think should be the minimum or in some senses the potential that everybody can achieve. Two of the fundamental innovations of the Renaissance over the last 500 years, the creation of the nation state and the creation of the firm, which have been so important in getting the world to where it is just now, have in many ways outlived their life. They are contradictory to the ability to build the kind of innovation that we need, social, economic, political innovation, to try and address the challenges that we have, especially with a culture and a population that is different from where they are started. So part of these questions, I think, are open, they're deep, and they have to be examined in a spirit of solidarity, of fraternity, and engagement, because our experiences are different, but the places that we want to go to are at least in the same direction. So if we have to work together to walk in the same direction, we must understand the multiple places that we come from and the ways that we can at least strengthen each other in moving forward in a much more progressive and positive way.
Now we have talked about universality, we have talked about fraternity, but this is not the whole sentence. It is universal fraternity as an idea to change the world. If we would, just for the two additional billion people on this planet, which we expect to be born in the next 30 years, if you would just, for them, use regenerative architecture, we could bring the global mean temperature down under 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees. Regenerative architecture is building settlements, houses, whatever, even infrastructures with bio-based materials. That means materials that grow back, in principle, without any limitations. Think of a forest, which is managed in a sustainable way. You cut a tree that gives place and provides light for a young tree to follow. And it goes on forever and ever. It's a cycle. Now, what do you do with the tree which you have cut? You can burn it when, and here is the climate effect, the CO2 or the carbon which is incorporated in a tree, CO2 would go back to the atmosphere, and when the new tree will come and so on. But what if you take the timber, for example, from the tree and build a house from it? Not for 30 years, not for 50 years, for 200 years, for 500 years, which is easy to do. Our ancestors did it all the time, actually. I was born in a house, a wooden house from the 16th century, and it will last for another 500 years, I'm absolutely sure. So if we use these biomaterials, we can do something fantastic. I call it Bauhaus Earth. It's a not-for-profit company, I founded. If I build a one-family house about 100 tons in weight from concrete and steel, simply by producing that material, I produce about 100 tons of CO2, which just go to the atmosphere. Now, if I would use timber, for example, instead of that, and today we have fantastic technologies to build even 20-story buildings from timber, cross-laminated timber and so on, we know this. Then I would not only substitute concrete and steel, that means I would avoid the 100 tons of CO2, but before the trees that have grown with timber have extracted 100 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. That means we are not only climate neutral, we are climate positive. And there are actually no downsides of that. We can do it at the same cost. We can do it fire safe, we can do it earthquake safe and so on. You provide accommodation, protection and so on, shelter for many people on Earth, in particular those in Africa, another 2 billion people. And as a side effect, without even thinking about it, you repair the climate. But anyway, we are working together with the University of Yale, for example, and they have asked students who are getting their lessons in timber-based buildings. Do you like them? Yes. Why? They smell so good. And that means you can build, of course you can build from stones in a very beautiful way, but if you really use a sort of timber, bamboo, what have you, you can build healthy, you can build beautiful, you can build stable, you can build in a way that is nice for all senses, and you can, as a side effect, repair the climate.
So if the planet is our common future, the planet is our common home, and we're all part of an extended family, not only of humans, but of all other living beings on the planet. The ability for us to live together is a very important lesson and message that is coming to us from multiple faiths, including the church. From what we've seen that has happened, at least in the last decade or so, is that the church has played a very important role in opening up the questions that I was talking about, the questions of the separation of society, the divisions within society, the fragmentation in society, and the fragmentation between human beings and nature. So the idea that they can be brought together, the idea that we can bring this together not only in our faith, but in our everyday life, I think is a very powerful idea.
Francis of Assisi is distinguished for two big things. Apart from the fact that he established a congregation, had a lot of followers, all of those followers were called brothers. In the monastery of St. Francis of Assisi, everybody was a brother. Okay, and that was to, as it were, say, we all equal, we all the same, as it were. And so some writers refer to Francis as a leader of a band of brothers. Okay, that's what the thing is. This is Francis of Assisi. And from this band of brothers, he extends it not only to human beings, but also to creation. That's why he made the song of the creation. Brother Sun, Sister Moon, everything is related to the human person. And accordingly, because everything is related to a human person, everything also merits to be cared for.